On my 7th birthday, a nice lady gave me a little two-wheel bike that I was persistently trying to ride in a restaurant parking lot next to my house. I was so small I couldn't get on it fast enough to start pedaling before it fell over. This was my lucky day. The man who owned the restaurant had been watching me and admired my tenacious attitude. Seeing I could use some assistance, he offered to hold the bike until I mounted, giving it a little push when I said I was ready. With his help, I managed to stay on a little longer each time and go a little farther. On the 6th try, I gained my balance and was riding all over his lot, yelling my head off. He was so delighted in sharing my victory, he invited me to have a slice of cold watermelon with him. This was the beginning of a long and profitable friendship. His name was Van Horn and, besides owning the large restaurant where we met, he owned a society supper club called Van Horn's Farm, located in the St. Louis suburb of Brentwood. The next few weeks following our meeting, I spent my after-school time getting acquainted with Mr. Horn and his restaurant's menu. This was really an educational adventure for a 7-year-old, who had never experienced anything grander than eating in White Castle's 5-cent hamburger joints. Van permitted me to sample anything I wished, often suggesting I try different things, once he was assured my eyes and stomach were in tune. On the days he didn't come to the restaurant, the cashiers were instructed to give me whatever I wished. Years later he would describe me as being well-mannered, clean, and never greedy. I suppose this last quality impressed him the most because one of his favorite sayings was, "Pigs get eaten." He always told me that when dealing with life, it's best to take some and leave some. I found this to be good advice. Shortly after my mother married Bone, we moved to a northern section of St. Louis called Jerry Patch, because of its earlier predominant Irish settlers. The area now consists of half Irish, half Italian, and a sprinkling of Polish and German people. I was enrolled in St. Leo's Catholic grade school where I would receive what little formal education I have. Although my schooling was to be only elementary, the neighborhood itself served as a university for higher understanding. We lived on Cass Avenue, which was the dividing boundary separating the white and black communities, black being referred to as colored during that time. It was generally understood that anyone having definite business during the daylight hours could cross territories safely, but, after sundown or on weekends, crossing could be hazardous to your health. This was especially true for a black caught in the white section. Besides the racial, we had the usual religious conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. Each had their own gangs, who guarded what they claimed as their territory, and it was asking for trouble if you went where you didn't belong. I solved these trespass difficulties by paying tribute to obtain safe conduct. This was 1934, and although I was only in my 8th year, I fully realized money was the great equalizer and protector. Prior to moving to North St. Louis, Mr. Horn had allowed me to shine shoes in his restaurant. I did this from a little leather-strapped carrying box he had built for me. Surprisingly, I soon was making more money in a couple of hours after school than my father made in a day working as a PWA laborer for 28 cents an hour. Prior to getting on the PWA, he worked 10 hours a day for $1. Mr. Horn must have appreciated my performance because he soon asked if I would like to work Friday and Saturday nights at his super club, selling cigarettes and cigars. Considering this offer would give me an opportunity to spend less time in a home occupied with a stepfather I disliked, I jumped at the chance. I had visited the farm before as his guest and had been warmly greeted by his mother, and his manager Mary, whom he later married. It was a beautiful and enjoyable place complete with chickens, cows and horses to ride. Van spoke to my mother and stepfather, and after receiving their permission, he had a hotel-type page boy uniform tailored for me. This uniform was an exact copy of the one worn by Johnny, the midget, who advertised Philip Morris cigarettes on radio for many years, and became famous by his "Call for Philip Morris" commercials. 45 years later I met Johnny in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he was working as a wine steward in a cocktail lounge, owned by a convicted Chicago killer I knew named Rocky D'Ambrosio. I will never forget the farm, nor the nights I worked there. Today, it would not be allowed because of child labor and liquor laws. The club was a huge place, and had been beautifully converted from an old Southern plantation-style mansion. On the first floor, there was a large bandstand and dance floor surrounded with tables, and bordered by small semi-private dining rooms. The second level contained a large balcony, lined with many tables, overlooking the band and dancers. There were more small semi-private dining rooms along the perimeter. Circling outside the club was a rose garden, complete with an array of colored lights, and many small screened dining rooms. Soft Glenn Miller-type dance music was piped into this area from the band. To a street kid, who was only familiar with a slum environment, this was a totally different world. This world was inhabited with elegantly dressed and happy people, who appeared to be completely oblivious to the country being in a Great Depression. My world was the exact opposite, for it was one in which everyone was struggling to survive and pay the rent. In the neighborhoods I knew, it was a common sight to see entire families evicted with all their furnishings, living on the sidewalks or the streets, no matter what the weather. It would be an understatement to say my first night's experience at the club whetted my appetite for the good life. From that night on it prevented me, mentally, from accepting my forced environment, and those related to it. Some readers may find it difficult, if not impossible, to imagine how a child not yet 9, with or without my background, could successfully function in situations that involved dealing with a mass of diverse adult personalities, both drunk and sober. I don't know about any other kids, but, in my case, it was similar to a newborn duck going into the water. For me, it just seemed natural and normal to be able to communicate with adults. Children are great actors and, given any part they can play it. The job was natural for me. It consisted mainly of what I had already learned of life, which was to look nice, act nice, and stay out of the way. Dressed in a cute little uniform, with a cigarette tray held waist-high by a velvet ribbon looped over the back of my neck. I would go back and forth to all the tables and rooms, inside and out, repeating softly, "Cigarettes? Cigars?" Looking back, I wonder how many people thought I was a midget. I was paid 20% on my gross sales and could keep all my tips, which were very generous. Sometimes a tipsy lady would want to kiss me and, if the price was right, I would put up my cheek for her to kiss. One night I made a small fortune allowing most of a college sorority to kiss me for $1 each. When they had finished, face was covered with lipstick, and Mr. Horn caught me going to the washroom to clean up. Smiling at me, he reminded me that I was there to sell cigarettes and nothing else, unless he got his cut. I got along with almost all of my fellow employees, which consisted of waiters and busboys, but there were a few who were jealous of the money I made. One waiter loudly remarked, for my benefit, that I made twice as much as he did for doing nothing. This remark hurt my feelings at the time, but I was to hear it repeated throughout my life, and grew to expect it. There was one waiter I really liked. He was a good-looking Italian about 30 years old, named Joe, and he had a way with the ladies, which resulted in my capitalizing off it. One night a lady asked, in a whisper, if I would deliver a message to Joe. After saying, yes, in a small whisper, she placed $1 in my palm with a note that simply stated her name and telephone number. After this, I kept an alert eye on Joe's station of tables. When I observed a lady moistening her lips while looking in his direction, I would approach her discreetly, softly saying, cigarettes, messages. One night a hypocrite socialite took offense and demanded to know what I meant by messages, and I innocently replied I was referring to a request anyone might wish to send to the band. Relieved, she calmed down and thanked me with a nice tip for being so thoughtful. The results from this episode proved to be quite profitable not only for me, but also for the band. After this I would include the word request into my spiel. Not knowing what inspired it, Mr. Horn also appreciated the public relations aspects of the idea. I was making additional money while implementing it. This incident convinced me to always dig deep when you run into a pile of horse shit because you may find a pony. Working with the rich, while living with the poor, gave me the unique opportunity to realize that one had something the other lacked, and it wasn't money. The answer as to what it was came to me one night on my way to work.
Thank you for watching. To support this channel, please subscribe and like the video.